You want me to get started?
Yes.
Okay. So, we had some materials sent out ahead of time, obviously, but the budget process is very much the same. Nobody's new. So over the summer, the select board says, okay, we're going to start the budget process. Department heads make a budget proposal, present that to me, the finance administrator. We work with department heads to take that budget proposal and prepare it into a budget proposal that we bring to the budget committee and select board to start the process. Just as an order of scope, from the original budget proposal that department heads presented to us, that budget increase was 14.6%. The budget request that Amy and myself worked with department heads on to find opportunities to have a more reasonable budget proposal was down to 9.24. So some progress has been made. Yeah, 9.28. We have some ideas for additional progress, and I think that's for certainly discussion at this level and the select board. Some of the pay me now, pay me later decisions, where we go with getting the money that we need to provide the services that everybody expects. So the budget binder is organized very much the same way. So the first 10 chapters are background information, all up to date as of the end of September. And so
Material, that's very good. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I actually have something I'm going to add that we'll talk a lot about, I suspect. But once we approve the capital improvement program, I'm going to get a printed copy of that, make it a part of the electronic budget binder and put it in here. The planning board, the select board and staff have put a lot of work into that document. And it is really to the point now where it's a very good planning document. And I think it's a good part of the discussions we have with this. So background information on revenue, which is an essentially important topic, unassigned fund balance, all of the activity from the treasurer accounts and the capital reserve and trust fund accounts over the past year, et cetera. And then the department budgets are organized in order of presentations. So we'll basically start out on chapter 11 at the October 16th meeting and then go through October, November, and the tax budget will be the last one. That's chapter 21. So this budget binder is available entirely electronically. 2024 budget is the trailing end of the URL. The one thing that's different, I mentioned before we got started, is the meetings are available for virtual participation, and we'll be recording them, uploading to YouTube. So virtual participation, members can participate virtually. I know we've done that a couple of times before, phone in and things like that. You can do that. You just don't count as a quorum. You don't count towards the quorum unless you're physically present. But if you're away and you want to tune in and on top of it, you can participate virtually. You can vote. You can discuss, act just like a full member, but it doesn't count towards having a quorum for actually holding. And then obviously this year you'll be able to watch the recordings if you miss a meeting. Stay apprised too. So that's how we got to here. Budget binder, questions about anything? I know you've had the binders for a couple of weeks now. Anything? Okay. You have
to go through the presentation. I have a couple of comments.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So you have a copy of the presentation in your binder, and so feel free to follow along. But I will get this started. So this will be the presentation I make to the select board. I'll give you an abbreviated version of it for discussion's sake. But I got it done ahead of time, so I figured I'd include it in the binder and use it as the talking point here. So big picture, Barrington hasn't changed a lot from last year to this year. The consumer price index, 12-month consumer price index is about 3.25%. So that is data through August of 2023.
And based on where?
Welcome. 3 categories of CPI data: New England, the Northeast, and Boston, Cambridge, Newton, which includes Stratford County.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you have that data if you look in the wage and benefits chapter, which is chapter 3. That data looks like after the pay plan. Yeah, there's a data sheet. Maybe we skipped printing it. Oh, you want to know why I didn't print it yet? That one's to be added because we're waiting for the Social Security cost of living adjustment, which is gonna actually be announced in 2 days. So there's a sheet that goes here which shows that backup data, the CPI data all the way back month, all the way back to September of 2022.
It's the same CPI that excludes food and energy.
It's the BLS,
Right.
Bureau of Labor Statistics data, yes. Yep.
So, they call it the BS and 3.5 cents. One.
Hey, if you have better data, feel free to propose it. It's a starting point.
There is one out there that includes the energy and food costs, which is usually several points higher.
Aggregated by BLS?
It's an old, that they used to use all the time.
Oh, okay.
That's more volatile because it includes those categories.
That's why they,
Look it out, yeah,
but it's not as good given the
right.
economy.
So, and I guess that can be a talking point when we get to that, that point, which is going to be pretty soon. Like I said, the data, last piece of data will be available in 2 days.
Well, when we look at the coal situation, we have to expand the discussion.
Mhm. Okay, so is it a collective opinion that in the current economy, the CPI data is a little bit underreported of actual
In
inflation?
terms of impact on our citizens, yes. And as such, the question I would raise when we discuss that, it will be, are we expecting any adverse effect from the inflation effect on our employees?
Mhm.
That's the issue I would see.
Right.
Or I guess I would like to see the categories that are excluded. What are those numbers?
Yeah.
Even if, just
Even if we can't have an accurate number. of
just
what
for
our-
our edification, what's the number?
And those you can get from.
Yeah.
The
So that's what, food and
energy.
energy, right?
Those are the keys.
Yeah. What are those numbers? Because that hits everybody. So.
Can you point me in that direction? I mean, I provide a link in the materials to the BLS data that I use for those 3 aggregations, which exclude food and energy. I don't know where to find food and energy. So if you know where those are, if you point me in the directions, I can aggregate
Well,
the data.
I can do some research too.
Okay.
but It is available.
Welcome, Amy.
Sorry.
No bother.
Let's be here. We're outside traffic.
No. Taking that to get sound, and Amy brought candy. Credit where credit's due.
No bowl though, it's hard to carry the bowl down there, so.
This is a rule for the select board that we just automatically discount anyone's presentation if they haven't.
I've already got my plan in place for the 16th.
What are you gonna bring?
I'm not gonna tip my hand.
Oh,
But
you don't
but
want
if
any?
community members want to come, I'll have extra, so. Okay, so more to come on CPI. I'll make sure to send out an email directly to the budget committee members once that Social Security cost of living is announced. Like I said, they announced their announcement will be on the 12th, so. we'll know that. Population continues to grow. It's up 191 from 2020, the last full census. The average household income is just over 100,000, 102, 512. The poverty rate has actually gone up a little bit, but it's 5.4%, still relatively low. Owner occupied housing, 92.4%, which continues to be pretty high. So
What do you get average household income?
from the ACS 5-year survey from the Fed too. You all know this, the funding of local government services. The biggest piece of information here is property tax remains less than 50% of what we bring in for revenue to cover our local government services. So The biggest additional piece of that pie is vehicle registration, which we know state and federal aid has actually been a growing wedge. State aid, the governor's commitment to reinstituting the meals and rooms tax distribution helped us out a lot. Fees for services, transfer station, building permit fees, et cetera. But it's important to look at all this as this group does regularly.
When will we know what we're gonna get for rooms and meals? When is that announced?
So about this time, it hasn't been
Hasn't
yet.
been yet.
And so it's not, now that they're using the formula, it's not really announced anymore. It used to be, we didn't know until the budget passed because they bypassed the statute that says use the formula. And they just included a line item in the budget and it was divided among municipalities. Now that it's back to the formula, it's subject to the actual revenues, which that data is available. Some communities go out and crunch their own numbers. I just wait for the Department of Revenue Administration to say. And so at tax rate setting is when they tell us. And so what we have traditionally done is use the prior year appropriation for budgeting purposes. So when I get that number for 2023, I'll budget for that in 2024. And then NHMA puts together an outlook, a revenue outlook over the summer sometime to say, hey, rooms and meals revenue is more than projected, less than projected. This year it's been more. So we will be over budget on revenue for rooms and meals because it's more than was last year.
Now, tax rate setting is consistent. It's continuing with that same time, or at least at the same time.
Just ahead of it. So the like I said, the numbers are available. We just hear from it from DRA when they reach out to finalize our revenue numbers and set the tax rate. So that's just a part of the process that we hear about it. With the school special meeting, that might delay tax rate setting because they opened up their budget, they closed it, they have to submit all those documents to DRA. And so they won't look at our tax rate until all of the dust is settled from them. But we have good cash flow, so the late tax rate shouldn't be too much of a problem. Ready to move on? Tax rate history. So you'll see 3 instances here where the assessment has the change in assessment has reduced the tax rate. The more you have to divide the money we need by, the lower the rate is, right?
Can you provide the annual property assessments as part of that? Another column?
Well, so there's the easiest way to do it is how I've done it, showing the average percent change in assessment for those years. The reason the other data is obscured, and you have the data in your binder, the MS1 is what you're looking for. That's the total assessed values. The problem with that is that takes into account all the new construction, any renovations, any cyclical value changes. So they come and visit your property once every 4 years. Maybe they didn't realize that you had a paved driveway. They pick up that value. So those categories add a tremendous amount of value. Last year was over $20 million in value to the total valuation. So what this number says is if you're trying to compare apples to apples, assessment went up an average of 8.4%. So you could do the math between 459 and 421. It's not a full 8.4% because the amount needed for taxes went up, but that allows you to compare apples to apples. Does that make sense? The valuation data is available. It's in chapter 5, I think, the Department of Revenue Administration, chapter 9, the MS1. There's all the raw values for assessed value. It's just there's a lot to feed into it, so it's less valuable to analyze it that way. This year, the select board is authorized a statistical update. Again, we've been on this 2-year cycle trying to stay current with values of the housing market. And they've done their work. The average increase this year is 30%. So across all property types, the values will be rising 30%. The good thing is it's relatively consistent across different property types. So people's taxes that they actually pay won't change much. We expect the tax rate to drop 25% probably from what it is now. So we'll see another one of these assessment up 30%. and what the rate will change. So, as a result of it. So you'll be the first to know once tax rate's sitting up.
We're required to reevaluate every 5 years.
Right.
We chose to do it frequently so that we don't have this huge jump at 5 years, so. Have reevaluate every 2 years.
Is there a cost for the revaluation?
Thanks for asking that.
So we're, I guess, how does that break down in terms of if we do it every 5 years, it's less than doing it every 2 years?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we have done, we contract out our assessing services. So we basically pay for it. They're doing the revaluation work annually, a portion of the revaluation work annually. And so there's no spike in cost when we do it. When we do it every 2 years versus every 5 years, it's just that they close the books and reopen them. So they're doing the revaluation work. They're monitoring values every year as part of our contract.
Okay.
They're tracking that data. What the revaluation does is broad brushstroke changes in values to try to bring all the values current. If they do that in the second year or the fifth year, they still have the data. They're still collecting it, tracking it. They're doing that as their services. When we authorize them, do the revaluation, they're just flipping the switch and saying, okay, we're going to do these new values and we're going to start from these values for the next year.
So does it cost us more to do it every 2 years than it would if we did it every 5 years?
Not necessarily.
No, but when do they adjust the relative values when they're in neighborhoods? So one neighborhood.
During a revaluation.
During each revaluation every 2 years.
And that's what I was saying this year, there weren't a lot of the average. So like I said, the average increased 30%. The average in different neighborhoods or housing categories is pretty close to 30%. And
Unlike the last time.
in 2019, when the average was 12.5%, mobile homes and modular homes, the average increase was 30%. And so those individual property owners experienced a much higher tax bill because they're paying more of a proportional share of the total appropriations for the town. So this year, there's going to be people that pay more, there's going to be people that pay less. For example, the average increase for commercial properties was 17%. So that's quite a bit lower than 30%. A lot of commercial property taxpayers in Barrington might end up paying less in actual tax dollars because of the value of their property. What I try to remind people is, this is how we tax in New Hampshire, right? We don't have a say over that. And people that live on the lake, they pay more in taxes because they have a higher value property. That doesn't mean they receive more services. And a lot of them will remind us that they've received less services because they maintain their own road.
Yeah.
But you aren't taxed based on the services that you receive, you're taxed based on the value of property. Period. And a job of the assessor is to make sure that your property is valued consistent with the fair market. And that just simply ensures that you're paying the appropriate share of taxes compared to your neighbors. If your house is worth 600,000 and my house is worth 200,000, but it's the same house and we haven't, corrected for the market to make sure that they're valued the same, you'd be paying more for the same. You'd be paying more in taxes. More questions about assessment or tax rate? Tax rate history. This is just a brief snapshot of the data. This is actually left over from last year. This data isn't available. It won't be until the tax rates are set again. But just to show the size of Barrington and how small our municipal tax rate is. So by population and value and land area, Barrington is 80th percentile and higher. But our municipal tax rate corrected for each of those is 14%, 9%, 8%. And I think what that demonstrates is that we have a very lean municipal government. The services that we provide are essential services, but we do it for a lot less than the vast majority of communities in the state.
I should remember this, but I don't. You said divided by metric. What's the metric?
There are different metrics. So population. So think of it as municipal property tax rate per capita.
Okay.
Would be like
Yeah,
the
okay.
or dollar value or per land area.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Measures of financial stability, so we want to maintain a level set tax rate. We don't want to see spikes and falls in the tax rate. Unassigned fund balance. So we'll talk a lot about this as the budget process progresses. But the unassigned fund balance target is 12.5%, which is the midpoint of the range, 8 to 17%. And this year, two factors have contributed to Barrington having a higher than normal balance in unassigned fund balance. First, you'll remember last year, the Budget Committee's recommendation, the select board put all warrant articles on tax rate to show, I think the majority of the justification was to show the true cost of those warrant articles so taxpayers could make informed decisions. All but one passed. And so it didn't reasonably have a huge impact on voter support, although there is an analysis of that in here in chapter 22. There's a warrant article analysis I did for the select board over the summer, which we can talk about at some point if you all want me to go over it. So that was one factor. So I anticipate the select board to use about $600,000 or $700,000 of unassigned fund balance at tax rate setting to buy down the tax rate. And that's about what the select board committed that they would do last year. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is just a silly accounting situation that the auditors backed us into, having to do with prepayments. So they essentially for a year had us carry our prepayments from prior year to the future year as almost as like an off the books encumbrance. So if you really know how to read a balance sheet, you would see that we had $1 million extra that was unaccounted for because it was a prepayment. But all it really did is it artificially reduced the unassigned fund balance. It understated the unassigned fund balance and carried that balance in a separate area of the balance sheet. And so we've corrected that this year, and the net result of that is it looks like we have a lot more fund balance than we did last year. Really, we always had it. It was just underrepresented from the 2021 audit. And in the 2022 audit, it's presented, I would say, appropriately. And so good news is we have a decent amount of unassigned fund balance to work with for the 2024 budget process. 15.3%. So this is a history of utilization. You'll see the little superscript 1 shows what we've used at town meeting. That's to fund warrant articles. And now we have a superscript 2, which shows to be used to buy down the tax rate. So that's 688,000. That's an estimate. It'll be finalized once the select board makes a final decision at tax rate setting.
And that assumes we don't have any warrant articles going forward next year to be paid for out of fund balance, correct? We're gonna do what we did last year.
That's up for discussion,
Okay.
but that would happen on the 2024 row.
Okay,
So to be determined. So this graph shows the similar data, but presented a little bit different. The orange bar is our percentage of unassigned fund balance. You'll see we're up there at 15% now. The yellow bar shows the dollar amount available in unassigned fund balance, and then the green bar shows how much we've used each year. And again, I mentioned cash flow and a late tax rate setting. This is where our cash flow is. This is where we have the money to continue paying our bills and operating government, even if our tax rate is forced to be set later, right? We only collect the biggest chunks of our revenue twice a year, the tax bills. And when we're delayed in issuing a tax bill, we're dipping farther into that savings to continue operating government, paying our bills. And that's one of the reasons it's so important. I know I don't have to explain that to all of you.
What do you have under the category of used at town meeting to reduce taxes? I don't remember we had anything last year.
No, that is, that's why there's an asterisk estimated to be finalized at tax rate setting.
Yeah, but go back to your other graph. Right, you've got some in 2022.
Oh, that's a combined category of either used at town meeting or to reduce taxes. Let's see the little, yeah, let's see the little
I got
slash. we really threw for a rents because I think this
Yeah.
chart is really valuable. But it looked really terrible with another set of bars that really meant the same thing, but happened a different way. Sorry to confuse.
Now, we're gonna get to it. The total requests for warrant articles is huge this year.
It is huge.
So, and we'll get into discussions what those are, but
Mhm.
because of that, I'm thinking we're not gonna be able, we want to use some of that to offset and pay for the warrant articles, and some things will be impact on taxes.
Mhm.
That's gonna raise a whole bunch of issues. What criteria do we use to put one in each
Mhm.
category and so on? And so, and really understanding fund balance usage and so on, and the issues there. I would like to request a deep dive into the fund balance. It gave us good background, but it's sort of beyond some things that I understood. So by November 6th meeting, we should have the tax rate, so that would be nailed
Should.
down. And it looks like that might be a lighter discussion in terms of available time versus the departmental budgets. I would like to ask if we could have a deep dive into the fund balance and the whole issues of how we're gonna deal with the warrant articles in that November 6th meeting.
Well, that's the board meeting.
Is it
Well,
the 6th?
And I'm happy to do it whenever. I would reserve more time at your budget committee meeting
I
for
think the
that
7th.
because of the library. So the new library proposal will also be presented along with the library budget on the November 6th meeting. And so I expect a lot of the budget committee meeting
Okay.
will be spent talking about that library proposal.
Then will we have that, could we do it on the 31st then?
What's the budget after the 31st?
That's the November 6th.
Yeah, that's the one that I think's gonna be the long one.
Oh, that's the library is gonna be good.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see when we get a short one.
So the next one after that, highway won't be bad, so
Oh, that's-
November 7th. Maybe that's what you said to begin with. I thought you said the 6th. I'm sorry. Were you
Yeah.
talking about at the budget committee meeting on the 7th?
The 7th.
Oh, okay. I don't think that would be a challenge.
I got the dates wrong.
So a warrant article discussion for 11/7. Everybody okay with that? So I guess what I would, not that I'm really in a position to be assigning homework, but what I would encourage everybody to look at ahead of that meeting is in chapter 22 of the budget binder. Oh, no,
No.
chapter 23.
Warrant article 22. I got.
Where did we put it, Amy?
I don't know. I was
What are you
just
looking
looking
for?
at-
The analysis,
I was looking under chapter 22 and I couldn't find it as you were talking, but I was on the line.
the analysis last year of, well, I guess that's what we made table of contents for, right?
when all else fails.
When all else fails.
Yeah.
Oh, is it unassigned fund balance, chapter 6? Please excuse me.
Yeah.
It is the second to last document in chapter 6. (2023) warrant article, tax rate impact analysis, dated April 6th.
Yep.
And it has the
That's where we go.
burgundy and green graphs. That's the second and third page. So I would encourage you to read that. What this does is it lays out how we used to do things with unassigned fund balance and warrant articles, the pros and cons of that, what we decided to do last year, and then more importantly, an analysis of what did it do? How did it change how people voted? The biggest, which I know, we don't have a huge sample size here, and I guess what I'll say. But based on the data analyzed, which is explained in here, we saw support for warrant articles was reduced by 16% on average. And so the subtext of that is that even at a 16% reduction in support, all but one warrant article still passed. asking for appropriations.
Well, it is. And that's why I think a deep dive is needed to say, what were the causes of that? And if we're going to rate which ones, because the bias is gonna come in. Well, we'll fund the ones that are not gonna be popular, but then they'll, when, so the fire truck goes into, it brings taxes and they'll always vote for it. That way we get everything.
Except last year, it was all on the tax rate. And if it was all on the tax rate again, you wouldn't have that problem.
But if that, but I can't see putting that value, total value of this tax.
Mhm.
So some mixture is probably likely. the best
Interesting.
Approach, or an approach we're gonna have to discuss at least.
Mhm.
Do we put it, and then we have the fund balance that's a little larger, that's available to be used.
Mhm.
That's, we push our percentage way up. We don't want to do that necessarily.
Right,
So that, I think that's the deep dive is really,
on the 7th.
how do we deal that with all of that?
So while you all are preparing for that discussion, after you read this and look at the other information available, if there is something else that you want to see, send us a request and we'll work to put it together for you. I would say that the last year, the warrant articles, total warrant article request was about $1 million. The total, the select board said, we plan to use this amount to file taxes for 688,000.
Right.
So voters in approving the warrant articles essentially approved $300,000 on the tax rate to fund kind of the balance. And so, I think we presented as much information as possible so people could make informed decisions. So, okay, November 7th. Good. Perfect. Okay, now that we've laid the foundation a little bit, we can talk about the budget and the budget proposal. So 2023 budget was 8.35 million. The proposed 2024 budget is $9,123,456. $774,000 difference, and 9.28%. And so, like I mentioned at the beginning, the initial budget request was 14%. We've worked it down to 9.28%, looking for those opportunities to maximize the taxpayer dollar for the services that we provide. And I had this conversation a lot with department heads through the budget development process. In its simplest terms, what we're doing when we're developing a budget and presenting it to voters is balancing the services provided with the cost to provide those services, right? And we could say that we want to provide more services and it will cost more. And the budget committee and the select board say, we don't need to provide more services, or it's okay if we provide fewer services to meet this cost to do so. And myself and department heads and Amy, our job is to do the work to say, this is what we can do with this amount of a budget. And if it means fewer services, then that's ultimately the voters' decision, but that's the budget committee and the select board to decide. And so with department heads, we talked a lot about what would be nice to have, what would allow them to provide more services or maybe even better services. But what does it cost to provide the level of services that we have now? And let's talk about what it would take to do more. Let's put more of a plan in place to talk to the select board about providing additional services or better services if it's going to cost more money. A lot of those conversations are around staffing, right? It's the biggest impacts that we've seen the last budget development process, this budget development process, are additional FTE or parts of an FTE in order to, in some cases, provide the same level of service because of increasing demand, or in other cases, provide a higher level of service. And so tying the services we provide with the cost to provide them is what we're doing here. We talked a lot about that. Getting it down to 9.28%. So this pie chart shows that 75% of the budget increase is wage and benefit impact factors. I mentioned just a second ago, that's, a big chunk of that, which we'll look at, is new positions and additional FTE. And then 25% is additional impacts, which we'll look at. So right now, we're looking at that 75% of the pie chart of what's new in the budget, right? How did we get to a 9.28% budget increase? So fire department staffing changes $114,000 this year. The first part of that is something we kicked the can down the road from last year. Remember, last year budget development, we said, oh, we'll take benefits out of the operating budget and wages out of the revolving fund, and we'll put the wages in the budget next year. Well, here we are, and it's $60,000 starting out. Increased overtime for shift coverage. So this is something the select board's talked a lot about. With the 24-hour schedule that the fire department's on now with 4 full-time employees, every time somebody is sick or takes a vacation day, that's 24 hours of overtime to fill that shift. And in order for our firefighters to have their time away, and maintain the level of service in terms of shift coverage, it requires a fairly substantial amount of overtime. You see that we already have that in the police department, which also operates in a shift coverage model, right? We maintain a level of service by providing officers available, a target of at least 2 on 24/7. So the fire department needs additional overtime in order to maintain that level. And so it's a substantial increase this year because we've increased to the 4 staff members and the 24-hour scheduling model. But that's a big increase. Administrative assistant. So this is a proposal in the fire department to have a 24-hour-a-week administrative assistant to provide administrative support to the department. So the biggest driver here, this has been part of a succession management plan with the fire chief. The amount of work our current fire chief does, not only because he's fast and efficient, he's been here for a long time, he knows everything there is to know about operating that fire department, but also because he's dedicated and regularly works 50, 60 hours a week. He's doing a lot of administrative tasks that he doesn't need to be doing, and it will be difficult to find his replacement that will also do those. So this model of getting administrative support in place before we hire for a new fire chief has been part of the discussion, but now it's time to put rubber to the road.
I didn't see a line item in the fire budget for the new person.
It's in the part-time wages.
Okay.
And this is where, when you have a lot of staff members, it's kind of hard to see the discrete changes like that. But if you look at, what chapter are we looking at here? 12. Chapter 12, the second page in chapter 12 should show you the wages and benefits for the fire department staff member. And you'll see the second to last one.
Oh, yeah.
Administrative assistant. And so just the wages is a total cost of about $25,000.
Gotcha.
Okay, highway seasonal landscaping and preventative maintenance mechanic. So you remember, I think it was when we were still meeting, but the school let us know that they could no longer provide grounds and maintenance support for the town. So at the beginning of last year, we had to jump into we bought a mower, and we pulled one of our highway crew members this summer off the crew and assigned him the task of mowing, basically. And it has worked well. It worked well this year because the highway department, the projects that they had going on, they could spare a crew member to be assigned to other duties. We won't always be so lucky, and there were quite a few times when we had to pull Shane, is who's been mowing, had to pull Shane off the mower to help with projects. We, got behind the landscaping tasks. Anyways, what we have proposed to do is hire a seasonal employee to do grounds maintenance, period. So from when grass is growing, we have a seasonal employee that mows grass and does landscaping activities for us. And then in the off season, when the grass isn't growing, have hours available for a preventative maintenance mechanic. Not necessarily the same person, but budgeted in the same way in the seasonal part-time wages. You'll hear more about that when we talk about the highway budget. Recreation administrative assistant, so this $25,000 is currently paid for out of the revolving fund. And the proposal is to transfer that to the operating budget this year. And so it doesn't change the position. The position is currently at 34 hours a week. But the Recreation Commission had previously agreed to fund the increased hours and benefits to bring the position to 34 hours a week out of the revolving fund. And this year they're proposing to put that in the operating budget. Again, you'll hear more about that. Talk about recreation budget.
What causes that switch this year?
So they asked, when the position was going to be expanded, they asked the select board to consider putting it in the budget. This was 2 years ago, I think. And the select board said, we have no idea what's going on with the economy and the post-COVID world. And so we're not interested in entertaining that. So the rec commission has always wanted it in the operating budget. The justification is really that the administrative assistant works alongside the director and assistant director, coordinating the activities. The administrative assistant isn't doing program activities like the other positions that are funded out of the revolving fund. So they feel like it's a cleaner balance in the duties and responsibilities as far as the town agreeing to pay for basically the back end of the recreation department and the revolving fund funding all the programs and staff members to run those programs.
We see the job description.
Sure. Absolutely.
Because the question is it true that this administrative assistant does not help schedule or answer phones or do anything else for the program side? That's.
Yeah, if I said that, that's not what I meant to say, right? I mean, the administrative assistant is there, takes payments for programs, helps people register for programs.
That's
certainly.
And that's a question, why, if that's.
But isn't running programs, yeah.
Isn't running them, but she's supporting them. So that's where I would have a discussion about whether we should absorb that into our initial budget.
That's what's the system.
Well, true. I know, we've had that discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, and certainly it's, up to this group and the select board to define where that line is. I think the historical conversation with the recreation department has been, should be mostly self-sufficient. And the division should be based on programs, right? So you have one group, the director, assistant director, and administrative assistant, who are developing programs and supporting the program staff that are doing what they're doing there behind the scenes. And then you have the programs who are working with the program directors and the camp counselors and, before and after care, site supervisors. They are the front side of the programs. They're all funded through the programs, along with the program expenses. So
one of the things that I'm sure we'll also discuss when we get into the rec department is that their warrant article is saying we want to expand the parks, which is a reasonable request. Because most towns do have park and rec as things, and the parks are shared by all residents, not just people who take advantage of some programs. So that's a reasonable request. It's an expansion of their scope to a degree. And so we'll get into that in much deeper depth with them when that time comes.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a savvy point that you made, because I think the parks that we're talking about right now have always existed, but nobody's really taking good care of them, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where the scope of changing, hey, we can't just ignore this stuff forever.
Right.
So yeah, certainly conversations to be had.
Do these numbers include benefits?
Yes.
They do.
They do. Yeah. So building department. So the long time, 10 years or so, building inspector, John Huckins, intends to retire next year. We have a succession management plan in place where the deputy will take over as the building inspector. And so what we have also talked about for years as we planned for John's retirement is it would be difficult to replace him with one person because he has a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge and the volume of the workload in the department has consistently been increasing. And John has been able to manage that additional workload because he has been doing the job for so long. He knows it so well. But even he has admitted that there are things that he and Jamie can't do because they just don't simply have time. They have inspection after inspection after inspection. And so the plan would be starting in April to hire an additional part-time deputy building inspector so that we would have two full FTEs structured as a full-time and two part-time building inspectors. So again, we'll talk more about that proposal with the building department budget proposal. And, you know, I think we're lucky in Barrington to have the building department code enforcement office that we do. A lot of communities, you talk to builders and contractors and they dread calling the town or calling for an inspection. In Barrington, people applaud, people in the trades applaud their ability to ask questions, get support, and really feel cooperative with the building inspectors. And that's partly because they take time and care and administrative duties. Last piece on this is the building department by statute is able to be funded, is able to be offset by revenue. So we set the rates for building permits in order to cover the costs of the department. And so we restructured that fee in 2021. And that has, we've seen a consistently increasing amount of revenue as a result. And so probably the revenue we're bringing in would cover this additional half FTE, or we could also consider increasing the building permit fees again in order to cover the additional costs so that they're offset and there isn't an impact. So again, it's not a direct offset. We're not paying with the same dollars, but it's, you know, money in, money out and ends up being a wash.
How are our fees? How do they compare relative to other towns?
They're less than the bigger towns and about on par with the similar sized towns. It's hard. I realized that it's so the fees. If you go to the chapter 5, which is the revenue chapter, you'll find our fee schedule.
Yep.
And when we updated the building department fees in, like I said, I think it was 2021, end of 2020. I realized that every community does it a little bit different. And so it's kind of hard to compare exactly. And so what John did at the time, which hasn't been updated since, but he did some examples of, okay, you're building a single family house on a vacant lot. What do you end up paying in permit fees when it's all said and done in this community or that community? And so he used that as a basis. And so the simplest way to increase the fee, the revenue brought in from the fees would be to increase the cost per thousand of construction costs. The other fees are basically each visit, like them for the mechanical inspections, it's $50. So they go out for an electrical inspection, mechanical inspection, it's $50. So, but certainly if we were going to look into recommending an increase to those, I could have John update that analysis.
I would like to know what impact you're having with the multi-occupancy, just, you know, apartment buildings and as a commercial building, and what ratios are there. And I think time to do one of those is extensively more than a single.
Oh, interesting. So you're almost thinking if the data justifies it, a different fee structure for multifamily and single family. Oh, interesting.
No, I don't know. That's my assumption, and I don't know his best job and all he has to do, but I would think he would have to put more time into multifamily and commercial.
How much are, look immediately, how much are the fees? How much money do we bring in as a result of the fees? Are we talking about the 23,000, just a tiny fraction of that, or is it more significant?
Yep, it's a good question. So in chapter 5, there's in every revenue report, but the first page shows the revenue history, and about 3/4 of the way, or no, about a third of the way down the page, you'll see all the permit fees.
Yeah.
So the total for 2023 is 228,000 in revenue from the building permit fees, electrical permit fees, mechanical, plumbing, and driveway. So 10%.
10%. Yeah.
While we're on that page,
Yes.
down on the bottom, it says it's a sale of municipal property.
Mhm.
And that seems to be a significant amount for this year estimated. And then I looked at the estimate page for that line. It's still not spent, but you're still saying it's going to be that amount. And I'd like you to, and just explain what that is and is it real?
Mhm. Let me just finish my note here. Different.
Because it's, there's a big fluctuation in sale of municipal property. So what are we planning? So is there a commitment for it or is it just?
Yeah, it's the tax deeded property. And so it ebbs and flows depending on what we have for property to sell. And so when a piece of property is taken for tax deed, the select board makes some decisions. Maybe we sell it directly to a butters if it's a small lot under a river or along Shore Drive, or maybe we sell it at auction, which we've done for the last couple of years. And so that's why you see the dramatic fluctuation. I guess I don't know what you were saying about where were you seeing that we haven't collected the revenue yet? Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Oh, in September?
This, so your 23 budget for that line item.
Mm-hmm. It's 175.
Request, you're showing the actual spent to date, year to date, and then estimate still shows 237. So I'm just asking, is that real or is that?
Yeah, I think you might be looking at the numbers wrong. So, so what you see on the first page of the revenue chapter
Yeah,
is, in the column all the way to the right, is our current budget estimate, which for sale of municipal property is 237,000. If you flip the page,
September 1st, it shows estimate, updated estimate, 237.
right, and so if you, on the 11/17,
Yeah,
if you look at the second column where it says year to date as of 7/31, you'll see that we've collected $237,562 as of 7/31.
good.
Okay, you're welcome.
I missed that.
Yep. So yeah, that's fully collected. All right, so moving along. Other staffing changes, 384,000. Census updates, these are those changes, you have somebody that maybe takes it in lieu of health insurance and then you hire somebody else and they have a family plan. That's a change of about $25,000. Pay plan step allowance, so a step for eligible employees is $70,000. The cost of living adjustment, right now, it's budgeted at 3%. I've encouraged the select board to let that be data driven. So I think once we see the Social Security cost of living and compare it with the CPI data, Steve will hopefully find us some food and energy numbers we can factor in there. We'll refine that number, but the budget is 3%. Yeah. It's possible here. Benefit cost increase. So every year I estimate a 10% increase in our benefit costs. Unfortunately, and anybody who deals in health insurance will tell you that it's kind of been crazy since beginning of COVID, during COVID and after COVID. So our actual health guaranteed maximum rate increase is 16.7% this year. Just got a call last week. And so this data is out of date a little bit. I'll get it updated once they set that final on October 16th. That doesn't change the budget a lot, but it is an impact. It's something that, we'll have to look at. Basically what they said is everybody put off their health procedures during COVID and we ended up getting a lot back in return of surplus, which was great. And then everybody started doing their delayed medical procedures after COVID. So they had to dip into their surplus. They hoped it would go away, but medical procedure utilization has continued at the same rate. And so now they need extra money to replenish their surplus. And again, Health Trust is a quasi-governmental organization, not a private deal. So they're governed by state regulations for the most part.
Right, weight loss drugs and things like that are driving budgets up as well higher.
And that's what I was about to say. So the pharmaceutical side, yeah, I don't know that they have any individual smoking gun, maybe weight loss drugs is part of it, but there is a tremendous increase in pharmaceutical utilization. And one of the things that our health insurance provider actually started doing a couple of years ago is they fully fund, and Scott's gonna love this. I don't know if I told you this, that they started doing this. Maybe I did. But they started fully funding what they call pharmacogenetics, doing genetic analysis, a DNA analysis of their members in order to get a report of the compatibility of their DNA, their genes with the drugs that they take, so that they aren't basically paying for drugs that aren't really effective for them genetically. And they pay for that in order to try to make sure that all of these pharmaceuticals that they're paying for through the health plans are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't know, it's a crazy deal. Okay.
That's not that crazy. About 30% of the population don't benefit by taking aspirin.
Really?
Yeah. You know, all the doctors are gonna say you gotta take the aspirin. That truth is 30% of them don't. But there's no way really to tell drugs and which are gonna be useful and which are not, just like cancer genes and things. There's some indications, but it's hard to actually pinpoint this change causes cancer, with few exceptions.
So,
All the statistics, multivariate analysis, they're all, yeah, there's correlations anyway. There's correlation with age.
Correlation is not causation.
But as they point out, genes are what's in the end.
Yeah, but the healthcare costs are going up all across and supposed to be sustained, I think, not just 1 year. It's supposed to be accelerating again. It dropped down a little bit for a while.
and one of the things that town did 2 years ago to try to get ahead and stay ahead of medical insurance utilization and making sure that we're aligning our utilization with the need is our kind of baseline health insurance plan has skin in the game to encourage what they call medical consumerism. And so and every employee, I think without exception, since we've added this health plan, has taken this health plan in comparison to the baseline plan we had before, which we still offer, and employees share in the premium cost for that. But anyways, this baseline plan that we have now is called a site of service plan, but it has a deductible which you're able to waive for outpatient procedures if you use a preferred location. And from Health Trust perspective, what they see is the cost that they actually pay for services at one site to another varies dramatically. You've seen it in the news, you hear about it. And so they have incentivized users to choose the more affordable location, even if they have to travel a little bit farther, whatever the situation may be, by making it not count towards their deductible. So the procedure is covered in full to encourage medical consumerism. And this is something I could really get behind because it makes sense to me. It's easy when you don't have any skin in the game, when you just show your insurance card and everything's covered and you have a $10, $20 copay, you don't think about those things. But all of a sudden, if you now have skin in the game, you're going to take the time and effort to try to save yourself money, which saves everybody money, and you're not going to overuse the system, which is costly. Okay, elections. So we had one election in 2023, there's 4 in 2024, and that just simply costs more money. The library processor last year, you'll remember they brought the processor from 27 to 40 hours. And so this $10,000 is the remaining 25% because that was activated in April. So that decision's already been made. Transfer station.
Can you please back up for a sec? Technology is going down though.
It did go down. It already.
Oh, it
go
did,
down.
okay.
But it didn't offset. It was more.
Yeah, I would think the technology person would be paid more than the library.
Yeah.
Just my opinion.
Transfer station. So, you may be surprised to know, we have additional hours in the summer. And when I started here, I was told that was because there's seasonal people here in the summer, place is busier. We've done an analysis, and Peter has done this as well, or brought it up to date. The 2 months with the most utilization by tonnage, January and December. All the other months, pretty much the same. So if we're gonna set our hours by utilization, we should have more hours in the winter and less hours in the summer. Aaron and I did the math. In order to keep the same schedule year round, so the Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday, year round, would cost an additional $8,600. Kind of no-brainer. So that's the proposal. Additional hours in the transfer station so that we have the same hours year round. And again, that department, Peter, the last year it was 68% funded through user fees. Is that the number?
Boy, I didn't bring, it's up there, it's at least 68.
Okay, police, maybe you've heard of the LEAC Commission, Law Enforcement Accreditation, something, that the state went through. They're in the final stages of essentially requiring a light accreditation for police departments, things like policy review and internal affairs, handling and the such. And so what the police department plans on doing is two things. One, utilizing a software tool to help track the training and policy review for the officers. And two, bringing back the deputy chief who retired last year to manage the initial on-ramp of the accreditation process. So he worked in the town of Durham, who is a CALEA accredited agency, and she's very familiar with the proper approach to this type of accreditation, or this type of process, I guess. And so funds to accomplish that.
What's the
accreditation
financial
process.
benefit of that accreditation?
It's required.
It's required.
There you go, they get called an unfunded mandate.
Since we're on that issue. I go on over and.
Let me just elaborate really quick, because I don't just mean to say that it's required. The chief and most law enforcement professionals recognize the value in a level of standardization in policies and policy review. And so I think it's generally accepted that it will be good for policing to have this baseline of consistency.
Yeah, I could see if there was a benefit for, liability insurance or something.
Well, I think there would be, and this is just speaking for me, but I mean, if something goes wrong in law enforcement, which it does, and you don't have those policies, procedures in place, whoever is wronged can turn around and say, hey, your guys don't have the training, or you didn't do this, the next thing, and it's on the town, and then it's on us to pay the bill. So if you have those standards in place, I think it helps protect the municipality from those lawsuits. And it also gives the officers more guidance in terms of, hey, this is how we want you to do this, so that I think it's good for everybody. And I think, if that's what, 8,500, I think that's short money for that type of thing. So, and the CALEA standard, which is sort of the higher level, that's very expensive and takes a long time. And what I believe they're trying to do with this lower, or not lower, but less expensive, is to enable the other communities, the smaller communities in New Hampshire, to also be able to get into some sort of accreditation without spending all the money that a CALEA accreditation would cost. So.
And as far as cost savings, Primex insures everybody, right? 98% of communities in the state are insured by Primex, the risk pool. And so we might not see a direct savings in our premiums because we go through this process. But as everybody does this and we are less exposed to the liability of not having in place, maybe our premiums won't increase as much, right? I didn't mean to cut you off, Steve, please.
That's all right, no, it was a good discussion.
And Dan has.
Yeah, one of the important things was, we just think it'll make our police department. That's worth a call. In and of itself, it's worth a call.
Two questions on when we get into the police, and that's gonna come up. One is a succession plan,
Mhm.
for the deputy position that's open. Assistant, whatever you call it.
Deputy, right.
And the second is, you have a war room one, we have an open border, and we have illegal aliens in Manchester. What are our contingency plans, and do we have a policy or anything? He says, what are we gonna do when they show up in this neighborhood? And now with the more cluster housing and multifamily housing units, that becomes a place they're gonna hit. And so what are we ready, and what is that? Is there something in this budget to make sure we can be ready for whatever hits us?
I'll let the chief know that you'd like to have that as part of the discussion for budget review.
And what do you think? Can you spend a little bit more? What type of costs would there be?
All right, if you look at what's happening in New York.
Yeah.
And you got all these illegal aliens coming in, they have to provide, under their policies, benefits. They have to feed them, they have to provide them housing. Now, when they show up and they've got park areas that they can show up to with their tents or whatever they might want to do, and they go knocking on doors begging for food, like they do. What do I expect our residents and our citizens to do? Are we gonna protect them from that? Is there a policy? Are we gonna feed them? I don't know. That's what I'm asking. Do we have anything in place that says, how are we gonna deal with it when it gets here?
So it's
And
not,
if we have to feed them, that's gotta be in the budget. If we have to provide housing for them, how are we gonna do that?
The fortunate thing is, I guess, the two things. One, as far as social services, most of what we do at a local level in Barrington is what is the minimum threshold required by the state as far as general assistance. And so we have general assistance guidelines that say, in order to be provided assistance in Barrington, you have to be a Barrington resident and you have to show these criteria and, this, and so that system is already in place. The
Correct.
second thing that I think
But
is.
that doesn't, so that's why it makes it a police department. Because now if those people come and don't have those credentials, don't meet those criteria, what do we do with them?
Yeah, what I was gonna say is I think the second piece of it that's valuable is in order, and I think the police chief does a great job at monitoring the level of service required by his department to meet the needs in Barrington. And those needs change constantly. And, we hire him to pay attention to that and say, what do we need to do to provide an appropriate level of service? But we go through that process every year. So that's reevaluated every year. And if it's a matter of, oh, hey, we have this influx of a certain type of crime that we need to deal with, we would never go more than a year without the opportunity to ask for the resources to meet the changing need in the community. And so I think it's perfectly appropriate to ask the police chief if he's concerned about, the changing landscape of crime in New Hampshire or in Barrington. How has the drug use impacted the services provided by our law enforcement professionals, and say, hey, is there anything that you're not asking for in this year's budget that would help you better be prepared for X, Y, and Z unknown? As far as the how he and his department is preparing for and addressing the changing landscape of crime in Barrington, I mean, that's his wheelhouse, right? That's why he's in charge of the department the way that he is. As it relates to the budget, like I said, asking if there's something that he isn't asking for that he needs.
There are other departments that are gonna be affected by it as well. Oh, and I guess our residents, go ahead and buy more ammo.
Maybe more directly, what I would say
you just
is,
ship them off to Dover and Portsmouth, right?
Well, they're in Portland.
Yeah.
Go up to Portland and see what they're
Yeah.
facing right now. So, we're more insulated because of the nature of our community.
We don't have any hotels or motels in town, but just across the river up there.
Yeah, Dover, Yeah, so if they show up in Dover, they're gonna come here. I mean, that's just the way they work.
Okay, so the last one here is the
New York's full, sorry.
is regrading the program, the social media
Well, you
specialist.
saw what the mayor of New York is doing. He's shipping them up into upstate New York.
We're full is what he says,
And they're not illegal.
even though they lost 100,000 people.
Yeah, they came in illegally and then we gave them credentials and then go, yeah, don't go there.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, after the meeting, you have all the national political conversations you want. I guess for the purpose of this, understanding the budget impact of the services that we provide, I don't think that we're experiencing dramatic change in policing in Barrington right now. And
Yes.
I don't think it would be, and I guess my point about we go through a budget process every year, I don't think that we will be caught dramatically behind the 8 ball if we see a change, a dramatic change in the policing required, because we, have another bite at the apple every year. And so I don't think, I don't anticipate the police chief to budget for a lot of unknown if we're not having any evidence of changing needs in Barrington.
And his budget potentially,
Mhm.
was benefits to have staffing. Second is going to be, do we need to look at when you come with your contingency line item
Mhm.
to put something in there for that type of contingency?
Yeah, one of the things we'll talk about when we get to talking about the general assistance budget is post-COVID and the influx of cash to social services with the COVID timeframe. The state and the county through Community Action Partnership provided a higher level of service than ever before. One of the things that they provided was housing in hotels for an extended period of time. And they shut that off 3 months ago, 6 months ago, sometime this year. And what that has done, what we are experiencing is that providing additional services and then taking them away has created almost a new category of residents in need and seeking support. And so we have been providing an additional level of support than we have previously. We don't necessarily think this category of people didn't previously exist, but they weren't previously utilizing social services or relying on social services on an ongoing basis. And so we're working with the new clients in the general assistance to bridge the gap between, hey, we can't provide ongoing support. We don't have the resources or the policies to provide ongoing support, but bridge the gap, a hand up, not a handout kind of thing, get people back to a sustainable living situation. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I haven't proposed in this budget an increase to the general assistance budget. But, utilization through the end of the year may be cause for considering adding some to the incident fund to say, hey, what might happen here? So we'll see.
I mean, where people are most likely to be a problem is in cell and stop loss and things like that. Who's responsible for policing those properties? The town or is it so?
Yeah, from a law enforcement perspective, Barrington, I think the best local example is Willand Pond, if you're talking about areas for, people to set up like a homeless camp or something. And that ended up being a multi-agency response. I think maybe it was left to grow a little bit bigger than was easy to manage with singular agencies. So yeah, from a law enforcement perspective, it would be Barrington. From a management of the property perspective, Southeast Land Trust owns the property. It would be their, responsibility to take issue with utilization and use law enforcement as available or other programs.
That's probably not gonna be a big problem because Willard Pond is situated next to all kinds of businesses and places where, panhandling can go and actually go and support them. I would say Stonehouse Pond area, that There's nothing out there.
I mean, the fact of the matter is homeless don't go to rural areas as much as they do the city and places where there's money and services. So
Interesting read though, sometime if you're so interested, talking about the Stonehouse property, do a search for the Barrington Beggars. And the actual name, Peter, what was the family name?
I'm not sure.
The Barrington Beggars, they had a name anyways. It was a what's the most politically correct way to say gypsy? Wanderers?
Yeah.
Okay,
Travel.
travelers.
Yes.
There was a nomad camp on the Southeast Land Trust Stonehouse Forest property back in the early to mid 1900s, right? Wasn't that long ago. Their biggest nomad location was, I think, Londonderry. But they had an outpost in Barrington, in the Southeast Land Trust, Stonehouse Pond, Stonehouse Forest area.
In the 1900s.
In 1900s. Yeah. So Barrington Beggars, if you do a Google search for Barrington Beggars, there's Londonderry will come up, and I don't know, maybe I'll think of the name.
I believe there's some guy it's on Plains on the opposite side of the main lake. There used to be a guy that was homeless or lived there. I think illegally for a while. I think he's gone now, but
Oh, interesting.
Well, before Healthcott's property got developed, there was a guy living out there.
Okay. So additional budget impact factors, this is that 25% part of the pie chart, other things that aren't wage and benefit impacts. So general government building contracts, you'll see a $22,000 increase. We have found that with our facilities, we're barely meeting our needs when it comes to custodial services. And to keep our facilities looking good and lasting a long time, we'd like to complement those custodial services with contracted services for two main reasons. One, for regular deep cleans or additional services, and two, for backfilling when we have custodial staff out. We just don't have a lot of depth in our custodial staff, and so we're looking to contract out a portion of that. General government buildings communications, this is a kind of a misnomer because we just moved a portion of the admin contracts from admin contracts to general government buildings communications for our phone costs. It was just more appropriately budgeted here. You'll see that 14,000 coming out in a slide or two. Ambulance billing contracts. So this is mostly our paramedic intercept services. There's been a crazy amount of changes as it relates to Medicare billing, ambulance billing, and how providers, and especially paramedic providers, charge or bill for those services. The dust is starting to settle, but unfortunately the dust is settling on increased rates for when we need a paramedic intercept. So most of those costs will be offset from our ambulance bill that we issue and collect revenue on. But a portion of that, when people don't pay their bill, we will have to pay for the paramedic intercept, and we won't have any offsetting revenue. And so we're just looking at the expense side, and so it's only a piece of the puzzle, but we anticipate a continued increase in ambulance billing costs. Highway paved roads. So this is a $15,000 increase. This slide is just comprised of those individual lines that increase $10,000 or more. This one is basically an inflationary increase. The cost to do the same amount that we did last year, next year, costs $15,000 more, but the trigger is not.
What's technically the garden?
Invasive.
Very invasive, very aggressive, invasive species.
But you see clumps of it around on the roads and driving
3 or
around.
4 places.
But you're seeing fewer on Barrington roads.
I didn't see any spraying done on Beauty Hill this year.
Was it on the list?
That was one of the lists, and there's a clump of it just down at the very bottom of it, just before you get to the curve 125.
Yeah, so it isn't all done every year. The isolating parts of it, hitting it 2 years in a row so we can manage it. And part of that's based on cost. So I think we pay the guy like $7,000 or $10,000 a year, and he does that much worth of spraying.
Yeah, and I don't know how much the weather impacted his spraying and that this year, because with all the rain that we've had, and there's some big restrictions on runoff and that.
It's pretty equal opportunity killers,
Mhm.
the chemicals.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so,
just go back.
oh, please, sorry.
Oh, maybe we'll keep going. The library, it's not in this, so as I've said, the cost of the new library, the cost of new equipment, but there's also ongoing costs, like I assume there would be increased cost to clean.
Mhm.
I assume that's not included in that number?
Correct. And the library, I'm actually meeting with the library trustee chair tomorrow morning to help figure out how I can help calculate some of those anticipated costs. The budget impact won't happen until 2025 because the new library won't be, any new library that's approved won't be open until not 2024 budget. And so it won't show up in the 2024 budget proposal, but they're committed to showing what those costs will be in, as a budget impact in 2025 or after, but probably 20.
Just, I'll ask them in advance if this move will continue, we can be a community center as well as a library.
No. Okay, paving. So we added 50,000 last year, proposing to add 50,000 this year. This is one of the areas that Amy and I worked with Mark to, he wanted to see $100,000 increase. What we propose as a compromise is to do a $50,000 increase in the budget and increase the paving non-lapsing warrant article request from 100,000 to 150. So the same target amount, but giving voters the opportunity to up or down the additional money. Highway contractors, there's been a rate increase, and so this funds the additional rates that they receive. Transfer station supplies, simply the cost of trash bags. It's offset by revenue, but it's still a pretty big cost increase. Recycling, the costs, the processing costs have continued to go up. Recycling's just a mess. We are not paying. There was a time when we were paying more to recycle than we were our municipal solid waste. Maybe a 2-year time. We're still paying more.
Yeah.
Pound for pound.
Recycling's the loser.
Okay.
So again,
There was a period where it came back to costing a little bit less.
Yeah.
Now it's costing more.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's costing more.
and the recycling committee is, looking at it more as a, save the landfill and be ecologically correct and all of that. So they realize that it's costly.
Okay, budget decreases of $10,000 or more, admin contracts. So you'll remember 14,000 of this $37,000 increase was really just a move. But the other reduction is we changed our IT services provider and they're more efficient. They provide better services for less money. So win-win. General government buildings equipment. So this is just a reduction in what we need, what we anticipate we need for next year. So revenue impacts. So there's still a few outstanding items on this, but as of right now, we anticipate an increase in meals and rooms tax. It was 160,000 additional in 2022. I think it will be another increase this year, probably not 30%, but I'll keep you posted. And the highway block grant will remain stable. It's about 220,000. Motor vehicle registrations. So you remember last year, I kind of gave you some grim news that we had an 8-year increase in a stable 8-year increase in motor vehicle registration fees as revenue. And COVID decreased, first year decrease. And that's $2 million, right? No, $1 million. Oh, $2 million. The $2 million? Yes, $2 million. 1.9. That's a big portion of our revenue. We're back to increasing again. So Rest easy, sleep tonight. Interest on investments. Crazy. We collected, I think, $15,000 total last year in interest on investments. 2022, $15,000. We collected over $30,000 just in August. So that's really good news.
But what rate are we getting? You know what the average rate is? I tried to figure that out.
I do. Okay, so all the credit in the world to Peter.
No, I would give all the credit to this guy.
Yeah, I know.
He's a better arm twister than I am.
So Peter received, as treasurer, Peter has a lot of say in where we keep our money, right? That's the biggest part of his job. And so Bank of New Hampshire approached the town and said, we'd like you to transfer your deposits to Bank of New Hampshire. And Peter said, let's hear them out. So we went to all the meetings, heard them out. The biggest problem with them is their accounts weren't fully bonded. And although they were taking advantage of some weird loophole where it was okay in state law, but state law requires that they're fully insured. And so we told them no. But Peter used that opportunity to go to TD Bank and say, hey, look at what they're offering us. Look at the rate of returns that they're offering us. And TD Bank made the commitment to giving us interest on investments at a rate at the top of the Fed range. Wherever the Fed range is, they give us the top. So Fed range is usually a 0.5 percentage point. Is that what the range is? They go.
The range of
the range of the
Yeah,
Fed rate.
right.
So they just give us the top of the rate, the top of the range.
So is that 30-day?
It's every statement.
Yep.
It's every statement.
Yeah.
And so I haven't looked at it in a couple months.
It's been over 30.
Yeah. Well, as far as the rate.
Oh, yeah, I haven't.
As far as the rate.
So you can put money into Fidelity and get 4 point something FDIC.
Maybe not, well, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't done any looking at what other offerings, if we could get more. If you were gonna make a case to make our money work harder for us, talk to the trustee of the trust funds. Because they make like nothing. And they have
$2 million.
2 million, yeah, they have $2 million. So
Nothing?
it's next to nothing.
Oh, my goodness.
Uh,
That's Pat.
That's Pat and Jack Gale, and the newest one who has applied to replace the one who resigned is Sally Varney. I don't know her, but if you do, catch her ear too.
We should make something on that.
Oh, it's more than 2 million, counting the school investments.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we have 682, yeah, so
There's no reason not to.
no reason not to.
TD at 47.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, why not?
Yeah, and they have more flexibility. Trustee of trust funds have a little bit more flexibility to invest the funds. I mean, that's really the largest, one of the bigger part of their roles is custody of the money. As far as the funds in the general fund under the control of the treasurer, those are generally by design in the statute required to be more liquid, and there are more restrictions, I guess, maybe the easiest way to say it.
Sure, yeah.
I know you know that. I'm just saying.
We are allowed to invest in some kind of, I can't remember.
Public deposit investment pool, the PDIP, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but there's another way people can invest. And I can't remember, it's not stocks, but it's something like it. But again, part of what we're trying to do is make sure that number one is liquid and number two, it's safe. So you're not going to get FDIC on $6 million or $10 million.
Right, and that's what you were saying about the 4%. I wonder what the cap is.
Yeah, I mean, do we have an advisor? I mean, I wouldn't expect someone like Pat or Jack to really understand that. Do we have somebody we can go with? Because really, you're talking about bonds of some sort, right?
Yep. So we don't. What other communities do is most of them rely on the services provided by the public deposit investment pool. And that's the one uninsured investment that is allowed for general funds. Like I said, trust capital reserves and trust funds have more flexibility. I'm not specifically familiar with everything that they have available to them. But most communities that invest more aggressively use the public deposit investment. So they don't have to worry about having an advisor making regular decisions and changes.
We used them back when I first started.
Beat it,
Public deposit money.
investment pool. And they've been seeing great returns. Okay. So that's revenue. Requested warrant articles, as it was previously noted, there's a huge request this year. I just want to go through the list. Bridge and culvert capital reserve, 300,000. Highway heavy equipment capital reserve, 300,000. One of the reasons I want to include the copy of the capital improvements program in the binder once it's finalized by the planning board is because at the select board meeting on October 2nd, the select board made a commitment. I don't mean that to say, they agreed to a plan, a funding plan, to fully fund that capital improvement program out to 2034. Part of that plan is setting enough money aside each year in capital reserves to fund those aspects of the plan, right? So bridge and culvert capital reserve, that $300,000 we're looking to add to that gives us money available to fund at the appropriate schedule projects on the capital improvement plan. Highway heavy equipment capital reserve, same thing. To fund that equipment replacement on the schedule provided, we need to add $300,000 this year, and there's a whole schedule in there. And so I want this group to be talking about that also, so that if we consider reducing any of those funding requests, we understand it has an impact to the funds available to fund that CIP years down the road. Okay, Old Settlers. So this is the 20% match. This is a $1 million bridge project, and we've got to raise our match. This is scheduled for 2025. Richardson Pond Dam. I expect a lot of conversation about this through the process, but the proposal right now, just as a placeholder, is as a separate warrant article to fund 200,000. Conservation Commission has committed to having a cost share, maybe 100,000 from the Conservation Fund. But there will be more on that.
Can I interject?
Please.
Conservation Commission has over $600,000 in their little kitty. And so I am very opposed to taking taxpayer money on top of taxpayer money to support more activity. They've got over 600,000. They could do this 3 times.
So should they come in and talk to us about this? Should we have them?
It's a good idea.
Sounds to me like they could go forward fund the entire reconstruction project.
Yeah.
Or take it down.
We talk about this last year.
Mhm.
Yeah, we did. I even went out and did a site survey of that.
But yeah, I think having them come and explain themselves would be useful.
Okay, so public safety design and impact fee study. So you remember that we took off the plan to do anything with the public safety building last year because we wanted to design. This year, the police chief and fire chief, in evaluating the options, favored the plan of bringing a warrant article to residents this year to get design money, almost as a litmus test to support for the eventual project. They don't really have tremendous concerns that there won't be enough resident support, but they're looking at a potentially $3 million project. They've seen what's happened with the library, and they want to use this opportunity, even though it delays the project a little bit, but to ask residents to appropriate the money to start getting buy-in for that project, give us an opportunity to talk about it. That impact fee study, this is a planning board thing. You remember we had impact fees to pay off the school bond. Every new home paid about $4,500 into that kitty. It's possible to enact impact fees for public safety to fund a portion of the addition. So new housing units would pay towards the bond essentially. So, but you have to have that study, you have to have an analysis done. So that 150,000 would include the $10,000 necessary to do that. Paving non-lapsing warrant article, like I said earlier, this is up from the usual 100,000 to 150. Fire truck capital reserve, 100,000. Dam repair, engineering, replacement capital reserve, 150. Emergency communications, 50. Police equipment capital reserve, 50. Transfer station capital reserve, 25. This is that new park maintenance and future infrastructure capital reserve, 15,000. Which we'll hear more about. Fire rescue equipment, 10,000, 3,000 for library technology. So total 1.673 million. So if you look in the unassigned fund balance chapter, which is chapter 6, you will see on the 4th page, which is the 3rd document, the last line where it shows, it projects out to 2024. We have, we're anticipated to have 15.6% unassigned fund balance, which the difference from the midpoint of the range, this is this colored document, the most colorful one. So the bottom right corner, you see 1,077,000. So that's the number in 2024 that I anticipate, based on these numbers, and I'm pulling out of thin air, but that I anticipate the town will have in surplus unassigned fund balance. So last year at this same time, it was 688,000. That's where that 688,000 to buy down the tax rate came from during budget development. So that million, if we did the same thing we did last year and the select board committed to using that 1,077,000 to buy down the tax rate and put all the warrant articles on the tax rate, that would leave us with a little under $600,000 of warrant articles with no funding source. Last year, it was a little over 300,000. So almost twice as much that would remain as a tax rate impact. Obviously, assuming they're all presented and assuming that they're all approved by voters. But just to give you a scale of where we are this year compared to last year. But on the 7th of November, we'll talk about that a heck of a lot more. Okay, that's the budget. You guys just want to vote your support right now, we probably don't need to meet again. Let the select board know that you love it as presented and. The company's so good, let's keep meeting.
We've got lots of candy to eat, so we've got to keep meeting.
Good point.
Probably have select board suggest to the voters that we go to a completely de-covered structure for everything.
I'm assuming everybody.
You want toll roads in Barrington? That's what I heard. You heard it here first.
Only on Beauty Hill.
We've already got that.
Okay, anything else binder budget related kickoff? The next meeting we have, we'll talk about fire and police. And
Let me ask you another question.
Oh, please.
First, because we haven't really gone through all of the executive line items. That's your responsibility.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
I'm sure we'll look at it. I would like to give members an opportunity to ask any questions.
Oh, okay,
that they
perfect.
have of your specific.
Perfect, by all means, please. So yeah, chapter 11.
I just had a question. It was last year too. We're spending a lot more money for printing. It's fairly minor, but it is increasing in every department's budget. Is there any way to renegotiate our contract with whoever?
We actually just did renegotiate it. It's with Seacoast Business Machines and the per copy cost. And we went out to all the people. Everybody wants to get your printing contracts, you know, so everybody hounds you. So we pay 7 cents, just under 7 cents for a color copy, and it's 0.7 of a cent for a black and white copy. And that includes the services for that's maintenance, parts and maintenance on all the machines. And so that is the best that we could get. And so one of the biggest single increase in printing costs is the town reports. Because we add color pictures.
Yeah.
People really love the color pictures. And so the thought was it was worth the extra money.
Yeah, no, I saw that. It's
Yeah.
just more, I remember last year, every budget went up $1,000, it seemed like, due to printing.
The other thing is, we've also talked about increasing transparency here, so I think we're showing more stuff to more people. Which is important. Yeah.
That's
it's
good.
good thing.
Do we have a way of measuring people coming into the website and what they're inquiring about to see if we are achieving our goal of expanding transparency and exposure of what we're doing?
Yes, we can monitor web traffic. I mean, they use Google Analytics, and if you're familiar with the tool, you can get as discrete as you want. They will give you the average cursor path on every page of the web page if you want it. I will tell you this, we don't spend a lot of time analyzing that data. I talk about our to-do list where we only have enough time to do this, and we just kind of always reprioritize these things. That would be on the list, right? A good analysis of our website and utilization. I would say more often than not, we spend our time creating content, making things available, and less time analyzing how.
Agree.
Many more
But
people are-
then again, looking at the economy of your time, how much time you are putting into trying to make it better.
Mhm.
If that's having a good impact and you start to see an increased traffic, that would be good. Now, I'm not sure when I looked at all the planning things that we've been doing, they come through this survey about the housing and all that.
Mhm.
I don't think we got the volume that I would have anticipated if we were getting the word out. So
Yeah.
I want to know which areas we could do better in getting the word out because they impacted.
Okay.
TIF was not well advertised. And we had, good, they didn't respond positively to that. I think it could have been marketed much better if we'd had exposure somehow. What they try to do it through the website, but it really didn't.
But they also did Facebook, which is helpful, ask the town, that was helpful and kind of good. But yeah, maybe you just say, we're gonna look at one area, the budget or something like that. So like when you just measure sort of passively, you probably get that from SEO off Google.
So yeah, I guess I would say this, Steve, two things. One, I think it really depends on what metric you're looking for in where you add value. So we talked a lot about making information available, openness and transparency, things like that. So because in what we're doing in being open and transparent in government is we're creating an archive, right? So it makes me immensely proud to be able to say that back to the 2018 budget, you can go see the entire budget binder online.
No
Right.
question. No
And so
question.
in 2018, if we did analysis of how many people were finding that budget binder, it would be probably single digits because it was never there. So I don't necessarily think that the best way to measure openness and transparency is how many people are actually seeing it. I think if we can make things available, that's better. I'll say an anecdote I gave to Amy when we were putting together these binders. I think the fact that these binders exist and the electronic budget binder, the fact that they exist is more valuable than any of the information inside them. And what I mean by that is, as far as resident support and impact of being open and transparent, if somebody knows that they can go online and see line item history back to 2013 and every level of detail for every position and every department, the fact that they know that exists allows a lot of people to say, I don't need to look at it. I don't need to look for it because it's there. And if there was something really crazy going on, all of that information wouldn't be there. Now that's not why we do it, right? We do it because it's part of the process and we want everybody to have all this information. But by that metric, we would be counting the number of people that don't look for it just because they know it's there and that's good enough for them, you know? So yeah, I think it's difficult. And then the other part of what you're talking about is promotion of initiatives. And the big challenge with that is we can't advocate, right? We can only inform. And so it makes, like, when you look at traditional tools to get people to do something, marketing, advertising, right? There's a whole world out there that gives you a really clear pathway to how to promote something really well. We can't do most of that. So it's difficult to make something attractive and sexy when you can only inform and you can't advocate. And so that makes it difficult to use, I would even say, traditional tools in promoting.
But I look at the TIF as informing, and it wasn't informed well, because
Okay.
everybody's opinion of what it meant was, oh my God, well, yeah, my taxes are.
Well,
gonna go
that's
up.
because it's part of the warrant article process. I think you have to start way before.
Yes,
It's like Ethan, now, what's up with parks? Do we want people to care about the park and have it, have maintenance and money dedicated?
Yeah.
If you just do as part of the warrant article, it gets lost in the.
well, that's, we'll talk about that, because I have a total aversion to food maintenance as a.
No, but that's what's different. But I just mean, it's a question, right, that we need people to really understand, and understanding it doesn't just come from the warrant article. It's
Yeah, and then, but that's with the website or using Facebook or whatever might have helped inform. And
But is that the town's responsibility? Is it really our responsibility, or whose responsibility is it?
that's a
And
good
how we-
discussion. It's a
Yeah.
good discussion. And so, but for example, you do have a good component where citizens can ask questions and your responses are there. And it's, I think that's a very effective communication tool, because it does give you a feel for what people are interested in or concerned about or whatever. And I'd like to see some more analysis of what kind of things are they really interested in. So, but that's just.
Okay, yeah. So other questions on the budgets
Yeah.
they're presented in chapter 11.
Well, when, the only question, does anybody else have any questions? All right, we just have one more. We'll talk about that later, because the decision that has to be, will probably come at the end of this process. And that's the incident fund, and it's gone up. You've asked for more this year,
No,
110,000.
nope. I level funded at 50,000.
Oh, that's not what's in the book.
Which page?
It's 3 of your explanation, so is that what's wrong? Or-
Okay, yeah, that could be wrong. The budget request on the first page, it's level funded. In the narrative, are you saying that it's showing 110?
Yeah. Okay, that's.
Okay. I'll get that part updated.
That's easy.
Yep.
All right.
So I wonder if that's that whole 5. No, it says 2024. Okay. We'll get that changed. Sorry about that.
All right, anybody else have any others?
No, I'm just, a little uncomfortable with 12.8% increase, but.
Now,
Maybe
Well,
that's
that's
just,
all right.
It's,
where can you go, you shave, can you shave it down to 10? I don't know.
that's, we'll be looking at that through the process, absolutely.
yeah, and the tough part with a lot of it, and that's why I focus a lot on the wage and benefit component, is a lot of it's wage and benefits, right? So we're looking at the merit increase and the cost of living increase, and then the benefit increases for the executive budget, that's what that 12.8% is, right? It's wages and benefits, by and large. And so the select board, I think, is committed to making a decision in October about cost of living adjustment and wage increases. So that'll kind of set the tone, and then we'll know what's off limits or not, essentially.
And it could be higher. I think you indicated, right, than the 3%.
Well, it's a.
Well, it depends on how you want to do food and energy.
And the food, but yeah, and I think that the other thing is what our turnover rates are. I haven't seen like that going up, I don't think. That's just my impression.
No, we've had pretty stable.
Yeah, and so those are factors into it. That's a cost in itself. If we have a lot of turnover, so and that gets hidden. It doesn't look like a budget impact, but services so.
Police and fire have been the biggest one, fire especially, but if you're looking at the 65 employees of the town as a whole.
We don't have anybody in reserve.
No, we're We are almost fully staffed, but no vacancies due to deployments.
Okay.
I think we only have what, 3 people that are eligible for this one.
As full-time employees, 3, there's a number of people. Hello?
Wondering, the Trails Committee is scheduled for this room.
Yes.
This time.
Oh, then, well.
Yep, we didn't anticipate the budget would take 2 hours to go through here on the first night. A miscalculation.
That's all right, we're.
Are you-
Winding down.
Better than
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Better than no.
So October 17th, we'll talk about police and fire. I think the chiefs will probably be here. But we'll start out that meeting with selection of officers.
Yes.
Cool.